Thanks. And welcome back here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here. So I'm basically Tilman, as you just heard. I'm some kind of product design person, and I've been working for the past decade in a couple of minor and major agencies. And I think 3.5 years ago, I met two founders of a company called Tomorrow. And they said to me, you know, Tilman, all those banks out there, they do so much shit with your money. Like they're investing it into coal-based power plants and factory farming and even nuclear weapons. And in fact, 10 German banks invested 8 billion euros into nuclear weapon industry. Just let it sink, like 8 billion euros into the nuclear weapon industry from German banks. So they set out and said, we want to change that. And we want to build a sustainable banking account that does actually good with all the money of the customers. And invest into things like financing the entire energy transition to renewable energy and building sustainable housing and that kind of stuff. And they also wanted, okay, here's a bit about Tomorrow. And they also asked me if I wanted to join building a great state-of-the-art banking app for this company, because they already knew back then that if you want to save the world, you have to throw a better party than those destroying it. And so basically out of that, Tomorrow became the first European company to combine mobile banking and sustainable finances. And they asked me if I wanted to join this challenge. And back then, when they asked, I knew if I said no, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So I said basically yes. And a couple of weeks later, I already started there. And my first challenge was to redesign the entire app from scratch again, which is what I think one of the most interesting challenges as a designer. So doing all the information architecture and everything from scratch again. And the first thing I did a couple of days later was setting up a little project plan. So basically, might look familiar to you. So going into user research, ideating, doing some information architecture, doing some UI design and prototyping, going into some usability testing and development and go live. So a couple of days later, we already started, and I spoke with tons of people, what they love about banking, what they hate about banking, what they're confused with, and all that kind of stuff. And we also had a look at the market. What do other competitors look like? What design principles do we want to have, and that kind of stuff. And then, a couple of weeks later, you do what at least I would do as a designer. You basically just open Figma and start sketching around. And we sketch around a ton, like this is just a little glimpse. I think in the end we produced like 1,000 artboards or something like that. And it was similar to what you saw earlier today. We were thinking about what if the account balance is the most important thing of this mobile banking account? Or what if the bookings are the most important thing? Or what if all the sub-accounts are the most important thing on the home screen? And later, a couple of days, we figured out there was one route that we wanted to prototype quickly. And realized there was this Figma feature of prototyping, so I just connected a couple of screens. I click on the send money flow. You open up the send money flow, then you can send money to someone, whatever, and go through the tab bar. And then I opened this Figma Mirror app on my phone and was going through this prototype. So clicking on the next screen, blah, blah, blah. And I was trying it again, going through the entire flow, and a third time. And I realized that somehow it felt like this was just screenshots of an actual app that I'm looking, like if I would be swiping through my gallery and looking at a couple of screenshots of different apps. And this was one of the moments in time where I realized that user experience is not just how your app looks like, but rather how your app feels like. And I was missing three major things here. The first one is I had no access to any micro-interactions or gestures. So for example, I wanted to have all the buttons, like if you press on them, that they get a bit smaller and they change the background color, something I couldn't do in Figma. I also wanted to use contextual data. So we've got something where you can create basically sub-accounts, and you can give a name and select an image. And I wanted to have the design like that you can actually do this, that you can create a sub-account, you see the name, you see the image that you selected, and actually check it out how it feels like. I couldn't do that in Figma either. And lastly, I wanted to use basically native inputs for realistic user experience. So we were also checking out the entire sign-up flow, which we are in the banking industry, there are a lot of input fields, and you have to select your salary and your name and whatnot. And it makes a tremendous difference between an input where you can just click on it and magically it's filled out in a usability testing, or if actually a keyboard opens up and you have to actually enter the salary or the name, because completely new questions will arise. So I figured out that Sketch might be the perfect design tool for sketching around ideas and quickly trying out things and doing design sprints with it and that kind of stuff. But at least for me, it was the worst design tool for true experience design. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm not state of the art anymore. I forgot to subscribe to a newsletter, and Figma is not the state of the art tool anymore. And I opened Google, searching for new app design tools now, and I was thinking maybe there's some great tool out there that will solve all my problems. But honestly, I didn't find anything out there, which is quite sad. But at the same time, we as designers are somehow true problem solvers or creative problem solvers. So the first thing that came to my mind was, if there's no tool out there, what if we would build a little website that was just faking the entire app experience? So websites are kind of cool. First one, it's based on HTML and JavaScript, and that runs in every browser. You can share it with your friends, colleagues, and whoever you want to share it with. The second thing, it's almost limitless. So you can do even three-dimensional first-person shooter games in a browser, and AI stuff, and AR stuff, and VR stuff. So there's tons of things that you can do with websites. And third one, maybe most important, if you're running into trouble, you can basically just Google it, and you will find some help guiding you through problems, or if you're not certain how to solve something. So based on that, I thought, okay, let's build a little website. And back then, I didn't start with just HTML and CSS, but rather use some framework called React. So how many of you have heard React or have used? Oh, that's a ton of people. That's cool. So React basically exists of little components that you create. For example, here I created a header component, text input component, and a button component. And on every screen, you stack them basically together. And that's what I did. So I wanted to start with this button, and I wanted to make it look like if you click on it, that as I said, it gets a bit smaller, and it changes the background color to get some haptic feedback when you click it. So I opened my favorite coding tool, which is called VS Code, and wrote some code for this button. I hope this is not too intimidating, because it actually is just two major things here. Like the first one is called implementation at the bottom, and this just says this is called a button, and there's some text inside this button. And the second thing above is CSS. So how many people of you have written something in CSS in their life already? Crazy, so many people. So you see, it's just basically just CSS. It's the background color, it's a border radius, a minimum width. So please show me a design tool that can handle minimum width with any designs, which I couldn't find until now. Some height, some color, and this active state is basically what happens if you tap on it. And in the same way, I started to build a couple of other components, like a text input, like a header component, that kind of stuff. And then I opened the browser, and voila, I had my first design here. And this was already actually interactive. So you can click on the input field. Unfortunately, you can't see it on the screen here, but it would open up. You can enter some number. You can click on the button, and it will react to the actual feed or to the finger that you point to it. And then we are living in this fintech world. We all need confetti, so you can just copy-paste a confetti component from somewhere on the internet. And now you've got this confetti component. You can use confetti on every screen that you would like to. And you could also use contextual data. So for example, the sign-up, if someone said the first name is Max, on the second screen you can say, welcome, Max. You can actually reuse the names that someone entered there. And based on that, I built together the entire prototype for a little design back then, how I imagined it to look like. Some kind of inside screen, some more menu with some items there. A new tab where you can create sub-accounts. And here you can actually enter a name for something, and you can select an image below, and based on that, you see the actual sub-account, how it would look like in the real world. And you can even deposit money on it. And now you've got money on this little prototype pocket. And you can also go to the settings and change the name or the image of this sub-account, like changing here, some new title, and you see it's updated here. You can also go to the profile, go even to card settings, and if you want to, you can change even the PIN of your card in this prototype. So after having a look at this, I thought, oh fuck, that looks like a real app that I have in my hands here. Like it feels the same way as if it would be an actual product that I downloaded from an app store. And by the way, I realized this might be the only truly systemic-driven design workflow in this world, because you're actually defining components and you're reusing them at a later stage. So we do the same for all the colors, the fonts, and the spaces, and everything around that. So if we decide to change, I don't know, the spacing size from 16 pixels to 20 pixels, it will adapt throughout the entire design within a couple of seconds. So it's kind of huge as a side effect here. So at some point, we decided it would be time to do some usability testing, because as a designer, you're always curious what you people that you design the app with, for are thinking of it. Like, do they understand it? Are they curious? Are they confused, or whatever? So we just took our little prototype that we built, opened it on a local browser, showed it to the people and gave them instructions like, please find the overdraft feature. And we had two major learnings with that. The first one was that people will actually get lost in the app when they're searching for something. Like they should be, we asked them to search for the overdraft feature, and some people landed in the profile and then to card settings because the subline of card settings said something like limits. And with all the current prototyping tools that we have out there, we would have never found that out because you can't go anywhere besides the happy path. And if you remember all those design tools like InVision, there was an error where if the user tapped on the wrong area, there would be even some kind of blue highlight color saying, hey, you've got to click here. So if you want to find out if people find your feature, that's not the right way, maybe. And the second learning was that you actually mimic the real experience. So if you got the sign up where you have to enter, well, I don't know, your salary, for example, people would actually have to enter the salary. We'll ask questions like, why do I have to enter salary now here? Or how precise should I enter the salary? Like, to the last digits or just a rough salary? So you've got completely new questions from your customers. So we learned a ton and we redesigned parts of the app. And at some point we said, okay, let's now hand it over to the engineers and build the entire app. And in my previous job, I always got questions like, oh, what should happen if someone clicks on the submit button and the input is not filled out? Should we throw an error? Should the button be disabled? I forgot about disabled buttons. Should we do that and that kind of stuff? And also questions like, oh, in the design you said here's 16 pixels of space. Should we use 18 pixels? Like, should we use 16 or 20 pixels? Because we only have two of those sizes in our design system. And to print those, we wrote a couple of lines of code, and we built a little feature we call inspect. So from now on, every time we would hover on a component, we would show you some specifications to this component on the right side. Like here, the font family, the size, the color, and some kind of text stuff here. And we added something we call states. So this is a screen, for example, on the left side that should actually change to the subscription of the user. So the screen should look different if you've got the top-tier subscription or the low-tier subscription. And as a developer, for example, or as a stakeholder, you can just go to this prototype and check out all the different states. What if the user didn't accept the latest terms and conditions? How should it look like then? And that kind of stuff. And we also got a couple of other use cases for this thing. For example, it's directly connected to a text localization engine. So whenever someone changes a text in the prototype, it will be automatically updated in the real app. And if someone changes the text in the real app, it will be updated in the prototype. So they are always in sync. And in fact, our UX copywriters actually write their text in the prototype, so they're doing it actually in the product. We also use it for stakeholder management. So if we build a new feature, we just copy the link and send it to our colleagues, to our managers, stakeholders, external partners, and so on. And we use it even for screenshots of marketing material. So in case you follow us on Instagram, for example, there's a high chance that those mock-ups are actually generated from our prototype. If you're interested into the technical details, we use TypeScript as a language framework. It's React, and we use some kind of CSS and JavaScript technology, which is called Emotion. If those terms don't say anything for you, no worries. I can go one step back. Someone wants to take a photo? Great. So we started this little thing 3 years ago, basically because I wanted to prototype a little button that reacted on the finger. Like it should get a bit smaller and change the background color. And that was 3 years ago. And we figured out that at the moment, this prototype is the central artifact of our entire product workflow. We use it for UI design, for prototyping, for usability testings, and even development and go live. We still use Figma for this ideation and architecture stuff, so it's a great tool for sketching around and being wild. But for all the other stuff, we started to use this prototype. And it's, I guess, one of the most valuable resources that we have in our company at the moment. So that's how we dealt with those issues at Tomorrow. But let's zoom out maybe a little bit, how our design tools evolved in the past. How many of you have started with Photoshop or have built screens with Photoshop? Great. Do you know all the times back then when we didn't have artboards in Photoshop and you had like a single PSD file for every single fucking screen that you were designing? And the only way was to use something like smart linked objects, and every time you would open a Photoshop file, you would not know if everything crashes or your computer will blow up. That's what you were used to. And I think Photoshop is a great tool for recharging photos. So in the end, it's just something like a pixel-based drawing tool. And then there was a big revolution coming up, which was called Sketch. You all might know it. And it basically made a vector, was basically a vector-based design tool. It had first ideas of symbols, they called it that way, so component-driven designs. You could create a component and reuse it at some other places. And they had even something like inspect, where your engineers could see all the spacings and the font size and that kind of stuff. And then there's a third revolution maybe, which was called, I would call it vector-based multiplayer drawing tool, which is Figma. How many of you use Figma at the moment here? Almost everyone, great. So I don't have to explain it to you, it's just the same, but Google Docs for design in the end. But if you realize, all of those three tools are in the end just drawing tools. They are no interface design tools. And there's even one guy from Facebook, not Mark Twain this time, even a guy from Facebook saying that even the most advanced digital design tools are based on workflows for drawing mere pictures of interfaces. And that is a problem. Because on the one side, we've got our low-fidelity design tools, where we create pictures of images, like Figma, Sketch, and all those design tools out there. And on the other hand, we've got the real product. You can zoom things, you can close an app, you have in dark mode, you have in light mode, you've got hardware access and all the kind of stuff. But we're designing still our little pictures of the interface. Now you might say, but we've got all of those tools like InVision for the click dummy stuff, and we've got After Effects for all those fine animations, and we've got Proto.io, and you name it, like all those. And to be honest, I also built one of them with a couple of colleagues at my former employer. We called it Alva, and it was basically a design tool which connected to the engineering or to the code components that your engineers used for a real website or a real app. And you could actually use those real components from them and drag them on a canvas and design with all those actual components. It's, I think, a story for another keynote. I want to annoy you with that stuff. It's unfortunately dead for the last 2 years or so, but I had one major learning when designing your own design tool, which was that every design tool out there that uses an interface will shape the way that we design. And that's because it uses its own abstractions and its own simplifications. And every time you build an interface, you can't do anything anymore. Like, you're starting with 100% of things you can do with code, and then you build an interface where you can just drag around, I don't know, rectangles or circles and stuff like that. And because of that, I believe that the only way to overcome this is by actually writing code as a high-fidelity product or prototype here in the middle. And now you might ask, why is code actually cool? And I've got a couple of minor and major use cases for this. One is, little example, you can actually react to user input. For example, here, if you create a sub-account, you can select an emoji based on what the user typed in as a name here. Something that I wouldn't came up with if I had just static design tools in my mind. Or you can add external living content, like a YouTube player, and your users can actually handle this YouTube player and skip and pause and do all the stuff within your designs. Or you can use a lot of device data, like geolocation or gyroscope, or things like that. And for example, if you're designing some kind of checkout and you have to enter your shipping address, you could show a little map of the user's location to reconfirm that he actually entered something right. And by the way, talking about navigation, how do you think Google Maps was prototyped? Do you really believe there was a Figma designer sitting in front of Figma and having one screen like, yeah, please turn right, another screen like, yeah, you reached the destination, and a couple of Google executives sitting around like, oh yeah, we built, yes, $1 billion, like this is a great navigation experience? Of course not, because designing a navigation experience is something completely different than actually just pictures of your interface. And you've got a ton of other access, like to all those hardware APIs, but I don't want to annoy you with that either. So, as I said earlier, I only believe that code will enable us to design without limits. So, wrapping up a bit, how did this coding stuff change the way we design experiences at tomorrow? And I think there are two major changes here. The first one is we learned a ton about technical challenges in code. And I think this is already the most important thing, because life is about learning, failing, and understanding things. The second one is that we care more about the actual experience and less about the visuals. So we think about what is an overdraft, not how does an overdraft look like. So is it really the same overdraft that every other bank offers, or should we make a twist to it? And we figured out that we got somehow a pretty efficient handover to our engineers, so we get almost no questions. And if we have discussions around things, they are about the most important or the more important stuff that we discuss with them. But of course, we also see some caveats. So the first one is that code and technical challenges can somehow limit you in your creativity. And this might sound weird at first sight, but when you can do everything, sometimes you're lost and you get frustrated very quickly. And the second thing is, when you write code for the first time, it can actually slow you down. But I think this is basically the same as if you change a design tool. It will take a couple of weeks until you actually get to know how it feels like and how it works. And it will take you years until you know all the Figma shortcuts, for example. So in the end, we also have engineers sitting beside us. So if you've got any question, we can ask them and they will answer it. So 2 major things that you could take away from this little talk here. The first one is, and this is very important for me, please do not fear code. You can do tremendous things with code. And it's a pretty cool learning curve. So you can just start with a tutorial on YouTube or on blog or I don't know, on webinar or whatever, and you can do your first little things. And the second one is think about what you want to design and then think about what the right design tool is. And if you figure out there is no right design tool, then just start building your own one. Like it might feel huge in the beginning, but we just started with this little button press. And somehow 3 years later, a complete design tool evolved out of it. And a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with Daniel from the conference, and he asked me, was that like, yeah, this is a cool story and so blah, blah, but how did you get buy-in from the management? And I think the honest answer is, we never asked, like we just did it because we thought it felt right, and no one asked questions. So thank you very much for listening to me. You can find me on Instagram or write me an email.
That was really amazing. Thank you so much, Tilman.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump right into some questions.
Yeah, let's go.
So let's go for some remote questions. Some of them are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try to put them all together into one. So does it mean from your point of view that if you want to make good design and test it, in the future you have to become a programmer and work with React?
I think there's a difference between an actual programmer or a developer or someone that tries to pretend to someone. So I would pretend to be some kind of developer. If there are any design tools that help you designing stuff, it's great, so just use them. But if you have the feeling that they do not give you enough access to the things that you want to achieve, I think the easiest solution is always code, because you can do actually anything in code.
So you're saying that if it's not enough for you, go beyond.
Yeah, and if your design workflow says Figma is enough, or you have the feeling Figma does cover all your needs, it's great. Like, you don't have to deal with all this stuff. But if it's not the case, please look around what other solutions are out there.
And do you have any opinion on other design tools like Framer, UXPin, Webflow?
To be honest, I did not use too many of them for a long time. I think Framer even shifted to some kind of web CMS tool, so you can build websites now with it. I used a couple of them some time ago at agencies, and I don't know, never.
Yeah. Why would
really
you, right? If
love
you
them.
build your own.
Maybe.
So now let's take a look into the on-site attendees. If there's any question, please raise your hand. Okay, we have 2 questions there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I saw that recently there are more and more no-code platforms coming out there. I know that the possibilities are pretty limited. They're mostly for MVPs, and then whenever you want to extend it, then you need a real developer behind. What are your thoughts about the no-code platforms?
That's a pretty interesting question. Like, are you referring to some code that's actually used then in the real world, or just for prototyping?
I think it's the same CMS as WordPress, but you can actually build an app with it. It's more or less, as you mentioned, about React, but more focused for designers. I think recently I used Bravo Studio, and it's really similar to what you mentioned. But in this case, you can even link API calls. But whenever you want to extend it, then you need a proper development behind.
So obviously, I wrote code for the last couple of years, so my opinion is somehow biased, but I had the feeling that writing code is not that huge, and it's sometimes even easier to learn than using those design tools or those no-code tools. And all those no-tool codes mostly require some kind of foundation, so some kind of component library or things that you need in the first place. So either you have a developer that's engineering this stuff, but then you can basically just do the entire thing in code, or you do it on your own. But yeah, but I'm not too deep in the no-code world, to be honest.
Thank you.
Okay, so there is one more question. If you are super fast, we can make it.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. It was great. I think it's fantastic to combine design and code, and you did it. Thank you. My question is, if you review them or test this, then the apps, did you implement also something for annotation, comments, or something like that?
We're actually getting more professional with this. So we have a first web engineer now working together with us on the prototype, and he came up with all the ideas of, yeah, let's do like GitHub or Git reviews, and let's do like merge requests and that kind of stuff. We don't do it at the moment. It's pretty fast and agile, I would say, somehow. But we're thinking about if that makes sense from now, because also we've got a couple of designers working on that, so sometimes pretty easily some chaos appears.
Yes, this would be probably the next stage. Fantastic, thanks.
Thanks.
Last one.
Mm-hmm.
Would you call yourself a designer who codes or a developer who designs?
I have no good idea. I'm a creative problem solver, maybe. Like, I think it's both.
Yeah,
in the
problem solver.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much to Tilman. Please give it
Thank you very much.
big applause.